Hello, my name is Alain Nègre. I'd like to introduce my book that builds on works by psychiatrist Carl Jung and physicist Wolfgang Pauli, a collaboration on mind-matter issues in the borderland between physics and psychology. Archetypes are structuring principles, patterns of behavior in human beings, like the hero and the shadow, the animus and anima, alongside many others. Astrology for Kepler and alchemy for Newton had a powerful influence on the framing of scientific hypotheses. Kepler believed that each planet had a soul. Newton postulated a force at distance, a mystical force, the force of gravity that has been accepted as a physical explanation. Thus, alchemy, astrology, and occult or religious elements have shaped many of the works of leading scientists. These connections have been hidden or minimized by 19th century historians of science. But today science is beginning to accept that its mathematical theories have not fallen from the sky by pure spirit. Once a mathematical theory is formed and tested against reality, the theory is interpreted, and through this interpretation, symbolic forms reappear. Thus, symbol is at the heart of the scientific epic. So we need to use here a transdisciplinary approach. Transdisciplinarity with the full meaning attached to prefix trans, what is at once between, across, and beyond each individual discipline. An important aspect of transdisciplinarity is to acknowledge the existence of different levels of reality. Why this? Because reality can be so complex that equally valid observations from different perspectives can appear to be contradictory. 4 from one side and 3 from the other side. We sometimes have to live with the paradox that opposite things can be simultaneously true. Like, for example, when we are measuring the cylinder, we see that we can detect the cylinder as a circle or as a square. And of course, this seems to be a paradox. Paradoxical relationships are found in quantum physics. Light can behave as both a wave and a particle at the same time. We don't know what exactly this duality is, although it is well defined in mathematics as a probability density. In the famous paradox of Schrödinger's cat, before opening the box, we should expect the cat to exist in some superposition zombie state of being both alive and dead, and we don't know what this superposition state would be like. Actually, quantum superposition does work for tiny things like electrons, but larger objects like cats must be regarded differently. In our world, the cat is alive or dead. In the quantum world, there is a superposition of dead and alive at the same time. Jung discovered the same type of paradoxical relationships in psychology. Inside the psychic content, at a certain level of reality, the conscious states and the unconscious states appear as dualities. The self is not only the center, but also the circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the center of this totality, just as the ego is the center of consciousness. Here is a diagram of Jung's model of the psyche. The C indicate complexes making up the personal unconscious, and A indicate archetypes making up the collective unconscious. The ego is shown orbiting in the band of consciousness around the central nucleus, the self. Complexes are personifications of archetypes. They are the means through which archetypes manifest themselves in the personal psyche. The ego is seen as both the mediator of the self to the world and of the world to the self. So there is also a duality here that can be expressed as self-ego. And the self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference. So we have to explore beyond our usual way of thinking, beyond the dilemma and its two alternatives, black or white. The dilemma is inherent to the Aristotelian logic, a logic employed for over 2000 years. But modern scientific findings require to remodel or readjust the dilemma into a tetralemma or kataskoti in Sanskrit. The dilemma is when you say that something is A or it is not A. The tetralemma adds two additional positions. It's A and not A combined, and it's neither A nor not A combined. So there is a striking affinity with quantum physics when we say that something is both a wave and a particle. That is to say, the something coexists in two contradictory states in a different level of reality. But we can also say that this something is neither a wave nor a particle, which points to a further, deeper level of reality. At first, cosmology was born with general relativity, but today we know that cosmology draws also from quantum physics. So there's the need to use a more inclusive quadrivalent logic, where both quantum physics and depth psychology are grounded in the same level of reality. Now, what is a number in its more fundamental nature? Pauli, who is a pioneer in quantum physics, thought of the number as a primary probability or a primary possibility, and by this he referred to the statistical laws of quantum physics. But who is Wolfgang Pauli? Pauli is famous for discovering the exclusion principle. No two electrons in an atom can have the same four quantum numbers. This explains why the structure of matter is as it is. In 1932, Pauli had a drink problem and was depressed. He went to seek help at the Carl Jung clinic. Both Jung and Pauli turned out to become friends. Both made enormous and lasting contributions to their fields. But in their many conversations, they went much further. Jung widened Pauli's horizons, introducing him to psychological ideas, and Pauli widened Jung's horizons in physical ideas. They explored the middle ground between their two fields, and obviously both were fascinated by the number as archetype. The number has a quantitative aspect which is used in mathematics. It is the pure number, the collection of unity and repetition of unity, what has remained of its qualitative and original aspect after the immense effort of abstraction that has been done throughout the development of mathematics. For Jung, the number is the most primitive element of order in the human mind, or an archetype of order which has become conscious. We may think of archetypes as patterns. In fact, they are only tendencies to exist of patterns, or primary possibilities, as Pauli would say. Jung and Pauli came to the conclusion that the realm of the psyche and the realm of matter were complementary aspects of a fundamental transcendental reality. Jung used the term unus mundus, an ancient alchemical concept, to describe a level of potential reality underlying all physical and psychological phenomena. The numbers are the basic archetypes that bridge between the conscious and the unus mundus. Here is a diagram by Marie-Louise von Franz showing the psychologist consciously turning away from physical reality. He observes the so-called psychic reality, A. The physicist, on the other hand, observes the psychic images of physical reality, which is represented by B. Both the psychologist and the physicist are enveloped by a common unknown, the unus mundus, represented by C. Most probably, the archetypes of natural numbers form the simplest structural patterns in C that manifest themselves on the threshold of perception. Marie-Louise von Franz was a close collaborator and follower of Carl Jung. She amplified Jung and Pauli, pointing out that mathematical order is common to both psychological and physical domains. She also proposed to see numbers as expressing rhythm. Since today we see processes everywhere rather than structures or static orders, I have also proposed seeing numbers in this perspective as rhythmic configurations of psychic energy. Numbers as archetypes can never be fully understood or boxed up with a simple definition. They always elude the complete grasp of our logical minds. Let's recall here a few meanings and significance they've had over millennia of time and many cultures. The one is the stage of the undifferentiated, the archetypal wholeness. It also symbolizes the distinction of the environment, the beginning, the starting point of all creation. 2 involves separation, division, or dissociation from original unity through discord and conflict. 3 symbolizes a manifestation process that can be understood in a 3 phases linear succession. 4 seems to be a fundamental structures of the cosmos, 4 directions, 4 seasons, 4 lunar phases. Now, before going further, I would like to observe 2 things. First, the words count, to count 1, 2, 3, etc., and recount are very close verbs in all languages. In Spanish, contar means calculate as well as tell. The dictionary for the Old English tellen says to mention or name a series of things one after another in order. And today a teller is a person who tells, relates or communicates, but also who counts or enumerates, like the teller in the bank or the teller who counts the votes. So these words seem to reflect a time when calculation and narrative did not contradict one another. Then, with the evolution of ideas, the word to tell eventually took on the meaning of enumerating facts, relating the events of a story, while the purely enumerating sense of arithmetic was left to the verb to count. Now, second observation, what do we see when we look up at the sky? We see the constellations, which are these groups of bright stars connected by imaginary lines reproducing human or animal images. But we know today that these remarkable forms of a sidereal mythology are not flat because they result from a perspective effect in a space now understood as 3-dimensional. In fact, with the advance of science, we've been awakened to consciousness of the sky's depth. Today we realize that the universe remains under construction, to arise, and through the observational and conceptual tools that extend them, the universe appears as a temporary structure, a history. The light coming from distant objects, sometimes separated by several billion light years, shows the stars as they were billions of years ago. So, from our place here on Earth, we see the history of the universe, and this history, this narrative of cosmological events, is the interpretation of the prevailing model of the universe. Physics can explain a primordial phase of differentiation between matter and light. And today, we observe in the deep background of the sky a pale reflection of this event, which occurred when the universe was 380,000 years old. Then, galaxies came forth, stars created the elements of life, life came in the form of molecules that replicated, and finally, animal and human species appeared. And so, the as above so below of the Hermetic tradition has been transformed into a genealogy link. We are the children of the stars. The heavier atoms, such as oxygen and iron, from which our bodies are made, were forged in the furnaces of these stars and then blasted into space. The dust from these gigantic galactic explosions, or supernovae, coalesce to form new stars and planets, and ultimately us. The narrative of the universe can be dated along a narrow time, graduated from zero to infinity. This unique universal time t may be a surprise, since we know that cosmology builds on relativistic space-time. But the cosmological principle of space homogeneity and isotropy, which is pretty well verified by observations, allows to simplify and define a unique cosmological time t related to universe expansion. Now, theoretical zero reflects an infinite temperature, but physics cannot explain phenomena for temperatures exceeding 10 to 32 degrees, called Planck temperature. Time thus does not begin at time zero, but at the end of Planck era, which is 10 to the minus 43 second, 100 billions of billions of billions of billions of billions of a second after zero. So this roadmap will be used to mark the structures that emerged: particles, atoms, galaxies, stars, planets, life, intelligence, and culture. We will look beyond the reductionist classic way of upward causation. Upward causation means cause rises upward from the base level of the elementary particles to atoms, to molecules, and to bulkier matter that includes the living cells and the brain. Smaller parts join into larger wholes as a result of the laws of nature and random chance. But the motion of life forms is not so easy to predict, so we have to take seriously the notion of emergence and downward causation, where the emergent properties of wholes are exercised upon the lower level, represented here by arrows that point downward. Now, usually scientists distinguish between weak emergence and strong emergence. Water is a case of weak emergence. It is formed from oxygen and hydrogen, which are gases. Water is H2O. It's a whole, which is more than the sum of its parts, since it manifests properties of a liquid which have emerged. That is, did not exist in these components. It's a case of weak emergence, because we can deduce the laws of a higher domain from a lower domain. It is reducible and fully analyzable. We can trace back to the individual components, like in flocking patterns of birds, termite or ants colonies, and all computational models. In strong emergence, the phenomena cannot be reduced to the individual components. Strong emergence creates different ontological levels from the initial level. And these new levels contain forces or entities able to exert a causal influence on inferior levels. But these phenomena are not computable. For example, wave function collapse in quantum mechanics, mind-brain relations, and models of consciousness. So, in order to see differently the history of the universe, that's our proposal. The idea here is to narrow down the cosmological events and prioritizing these strongly emergent organizational qualities, combined with qualitative notions borrowed from statistical mechanics, such as attractor, horizon, symmetries breakings, and phase transitions. And we're going to find 4 events that stand out and break the time continuity.
1, 2, 3, 1.
2 are strongly emergent events. The cosmic inflation that brought the universe out of the fluctuating quantum vacuum, and the big jump of awareness of being that came with Homo sapiens. Both events are characterized by exponential growth. Inflation is supposed to have begun at 10 to the minus 35 seconds, when the strong force separated from the electroweak one and lasted until about 10 to the minus 32 seconds. This very brief period of exponentially fast expansion brought the universe out of the fluctuating quantum vacuum, creating space and time. The other strongly emergent event, reflexive consciousness, also causes a very rapid acceleration, but here it is a rapid acceleration of information. In this chart, paleoanthropologist André Leroy-Gourhan shows the technological curves, in fact the cutting-edge length of flint. These curves appear here in solid lines, first extremely flat. Then they gradually accelerate before drilling the skull volume curve here in dotted line. We can say that evolution jumps from bioanatomical orbit to technological orbit, and today energy is relayed by information endowed with a remarkable rate of growth. The third event has got an echo still observed today in the form of the cosmic background radiation. It occurred at the age of 380,000 years. Before, matter and radiation remained strongly linked. After, the universe had expanded and cooled to the point where electrons and protons could catch each other and bind into atomic hydrogen. Radiation and matter decoupled. The universe became transparent for light. This is a horizon type, or temporal attracting event, in the sense that all possible universes were attracted towards the heat death of the thermodynamic second law, all except, of course, our own universe, which had the right parameters or constants that allowed grains of galaxies to hatch. So far we've got 3 events. Where is the 4th? Let's look at the 2 ends of the time axis. We can say they are like scars made with a pair of scissors, scars of a more fundamental time, which is cyclical time, the time of traditional cultures and of the unconscious. Let's see first t equals 0. This 0 does not belong to time. It has the characteristic of the temperature absolute zero or of the unsurpassable speed of light. As a matter of fact, using a logarithmic scale, this 0 stretches infinitely far back to minus infinity, and so t equals 0 has become an infinite horizon exactly as infinite time in the far future of the expansion of the universe. In the far future, there are many possible outcomes for the universe that may depend on dark energy measurements, Big Rip, Big Crunch, and so on. In any case, either matter will disappear, or we are back in Planck's condition. That is to say, time has no physical meaning. Thus, at both ends of linear time axis, two temporal horizons appear that are both infinite. These two infinities mean that something is wrong in theory. They hide what is to be discovered, waiting for a new theory. The cut of cyclical time, which is the basis of the meteoric rise of science, now returns as a boomerang through the two scars, not fully healed, at both ends of linear time, reflecting the current boundaries of theoretical physics. The reconnection of the two scars points towards beyond time. It incorporates the quality of the force, to which we will come back later. In alchemy, the opus circulare was represented as an Ouroboros, the serpent biting its tail. Reclosing linear time axis as a circle could help as a temporary phase of projective imagination, allowing a different thinking of the problem of time, and possibly opening new avenues for science to supersede itself. Now, what about the three? The three fates represented here symbolize the coming into being and the fading away of what happens. 3 is connected with time, which is identical with the flow of energy. While 4 relates to a static, feminine, inward-oriented wholeness, 3 symbolizes a manifestation process that can be understood as a 3-phase linear succession. It is a dynamic process which symbolizes the reconciliation or synthesis of opposites. Like in the 3 moments of the dialectic, the idea arises, passes into its opposite, and returns to itself by reconciling the thesis and antithesis. The synthesis is not a simple mixture of thesis and antithesis, but the superseding which aims at solving their tension. Once a synthesis has been reached, a new thesis can be created and the process begins anew, incrementally and progressively moving forward. So let's sum up this 3 phases process. The first phase is that of generation and expansion of a first impulse. The second phase is that of a contradictory tension between the one and the other. The third phase corresponds to a superseding of contraries. There is a movement toward reconciliation and development of a dynamic, making perceptible accession to consciousness. In the universe, this ternary process seems to be impressed by the forces of physics. 3 out of the 4 known forces or interactions of physics are responsible for the formation of structures in the universe. Strong force binds the nucleus. Electromagnetic force binds atoms. Gravitational force binds the solar system and the galaxies. The weak nuclear force does not contribute to a particular structure, but play a key role in the first moments of the universe and also in the transmutation of unstable atoms during radioactive decay. Now a ternary rhythm, impressed by physics interactions, seems to be articulated within the already defined 4 quadrants. Each quadrant may be divided into 3 stages that may be considered as the 3 moments of a dialectical process. In each quadrant, a gravity nuclear electromagnetic sequence may be detected, at least through the first 3 quadrants, when physical time is defined. Let's see the first quadrant, from inflation until light matter decoupling. Inflation is the first moment when the universe emerges from the quantum vacuum as a phase transition from the symmetrical or false vacuum to the real symmetry-broken vacuum. Pauli sees the early inflationary universe as a kind of supercomputer with superposed state of quantum registers. She uses the Ork or Penrose theory which stands for Orchestrated Objective Reduction, showing that gravity plays a role as a threshold that is reached at the close of the inflationary period when one universe is selected out of a superposition of many by a self-reduction mechanism. The second moment occurs when the temperature drop due to expansion slows the initial momentum and condenses the colossal energy of inflation into quarks, leptons, and bosons. The strong nuclear force converts photons into massive particles that oppose the energy of inflation. This is a primordial nucleosynthesis. Third moment. During this phase, the universe is opaque. Photons, here in yellow, cannot travel far without scattering on electrons. This is a phase of synthesis or friction, so to speak, between matter and light. Photons, which are vectors of information and conveyors of the electromagnetic interaction, remain imprisoned in matter. It is only with the temperature drop that they will be able to freely circulate and communicate. Let's see now the second quadrant, from light-matter decoupling until the emergence of Homo sapiens. First moment, the matter-light decoupling ushers the beginning of the stellar age. The athletic force of gravity leads to growth of local inhomogeneities or overdensities of matter, which are potential homes for galaxies to come and centers for any object, star, comet, animal, human. Second moment, with increasing gravity that collects and condenses the high-density areas, thermal pressure causes overheating that increases speeds and collisions of particles. Stars shine. Thermonuclear fusions make billions and billions of stars explode or implode, which gradually enrich the environment with carbon and heavy atoms. Third moment. The local friction between matter and light leads on Earth to the biosphere growth. Elements synthesized in stars and dispersed into the interstellar medium are combined. Molecular interactions that use electromagnetic interactions develop forms better and better adapted to the environment, ensuring the communication of information around the membranes of the cells of biological beings. The biosphere absorbs hot photons from the sun and emits cold photons at longer wavelength. Let's see now the third quadrant, from the emergence of Homo sapiens until the initial final singularity. This quadrant starts with the emergence of reflexive consciousness. Despite their brain at the top of universal complexity, Homo sapiens are often considered as an epiphenomenon by most cosmologists. We will follow here the optimistic thought of those who see consciousness as maintaining in a universe where matter undergoes an overall entropic evolution by getting incorporated into clouds of particles. So the first moment starts with the emergence of consciousness. The Penrose's Ork theory is primarily a model for consciousness. Consciousness is supposed to arise from quantum effects in some protein polymers called microtubules located in the neurons of the brain. Again, gravity plays a role in this phase as a quantum gravity threshold. Second moment. Conscious beings will be challenged to transform and regenerate against stars that collapse into black holes. Since all matter is radioactive to various degrees, atomic nuclei eventually disintegrate to form other particles. Even the proton, one of the most stable elementary particles, will decay in the very deep future in about 10 to 37 years. So what about life and consciousness? Physicist Freeman Dyson has argued that the basis of consciousness is not associated to a particular type of matter, such as carbon, but to the complex structure of the substrate. It thus showed that life could persist in cold and dark conditions of an open universe in indefinite expansion. Life and intelligence would thus be able to live on long after the disappearance of matter. Third moment. Once all the protons in the universe have decayed and all the black holes have evaporated, the universe consists of an expanding sea of atom-like bonding of positron-electron pairs spiraling closer and closer to mutual annihilation. They will be electromagnetically attracted as they attempt to move toward each other. Frank Tipler has taken up the Dyson arguments and extended them to the scenario of a closed universe, a universe transformed into a huge information processing apparatus. Now, whatever be the outcomes for the future of the universe and their prevailing conditions, Planck's temperature or eternal cold, in any case, physical time has no meaning, and this may hinder the uncovering of a threefold sequence. The passage to the fourth quadrant reminds, in depth psychology, of the difficult transition from 3 to 4. For Jung, quaternity is the archetypal foundation of the human psyche, the wholeness of the psychic processes of the conscious and the unconscious. In order to orient ourselves, we must have a function which ascertains that something is there, sensation. A second function which establishes what is, thinking. A third function which states whether it suits us or not, whether we wish to accept it or not, feeling. And a fourth function which indicates where it came from and where it is going, intuition. So one of these faculties dominates and determines our psychological type. If thinking function dominates, its opposite, feeling function, is repressed into the unconscious and vice versa. If intuition dominates, sensation is repressed and vice versa. To achieve fullness, we must look for the repressed faculty in the unconscious and integrate it with the three other conscious faculties. The lower function coincides with the dark side of the human personality. Its integration to consciousness corresponds to the passage of the 3 to 4, allowing a return to the 1, not through a regression to fusional state, but in a fully differentiated plane of consciousness. This problematic transition between the two numbers has been intuitively understood by alchemists since antiquity as indicating a blockage in the flow of thought. Jung very often quotes the axiom of Maria Prophetissa, an early 1st century alchemist. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, and out of the third comes the 1 as a fourth. Jung used this axiom as a metaphor for wholeness and individuation. In terms of scientific cosmology, one should not be surprised to find echoes of this fourth associated to the Planck era events at the onset of the fourth quadrant. They incorporate the quality of the fourth in the very sense of the undifferentiated of contemporary research in physics. From initial or final singularity and infinity to cosmological inflation. All theories are imperfect and likely to be superseded by a better one in the future. Frank Tipler assumes that intelligent beings will gather the expanding universe and gravitationally concentrate it as a point that he calls the omega point, endowed with a computational capacity that will have become infinite. This state of the universe, when intelligent life will have the attributes of omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence obviously echoes the nature of an affirmative first phase. The attractive gravity of an imperfect omega point may be counterbalanced in a second phase by the repelling quantum vacuum pressure or dark energy. This confrontation may be that which creates the superpositions or separations in quantum form. That is to say, the infinite number of virtual universes endowed with different constants and laws of physics. The third phase, so to speak, could be that of self-creating and destroying virtual particles of the quantum vacuum, which erase the infinite number of virtual universes and narrow their number down to a very large, though finite, superpositions of multiverses. Now we've just made a complete tour with a reflection of a 4x3 numerical matrix that shines through the interpretation of the scientific model of the universe. For those interested in going further, I recommend reading my book, in which I show that this structure perfectly matches the 12 figures of the zodiac. This shouldn't appear amazing, since the zodiac is rooted in the same archetype of the number. Its remarkable language is based on the harmonious arrangement of 3 and 4 and blended with the Yin-Yang symbol that highlights a subtle asymmetry. The question of a possible use of enantiodromia is also raised in the book. Enantiodromia was updated in modern psychological terms by Jung as the effect of a reversal of a unilateral reality into its opposite. It could be shown to operate through the history of the universe for each of the 6 polarities.